I'm Emma, 28, female, single, and according to my family, the black sheep. I guess I've always been the odd one out. My siblings are married with kids, while I've been focused on my career and building a life I'm proud of. That's not to say I don't love my family. For years, we've had this tradition of renting a big, fancy beach house every summer. It's always been a highlight of the year, full of laughter, bonfires, and way too much food. It's one of the few things that really brought us all together, despite our differences. This year, though, things took a turn for the weird. A couple of months ago, the family group chat lit up with talk of vacation planning. My mom dropped a message about trying something new this year, a voting system to decide who would join the trip. At first, I thought it was a joke. I mean, who votes on family vacations? But no, it was serious. The idea was that everyone would anonymously vote on who they thought added the most value to the trip. My mom framed it as a way to make the vacation fairer, whatever that meant. I didn't love it, but I figured it was just another one of those quirky family things. I mean, we've always had a bit of tension, me being the odd one out and all, but I wasn't too worried. I've always contributed. I help with the rental costs, clean up, and do my part. Plus, I'm family. I assumed that counted for something. Things started to feel off almost immediately. The group chat, which had always been buzzing with everyone's plans and jokes, got weirdly quiet. Details about the trip, like who was booking the house or which week we'd be going, started trickling in through private messages instead of the chat. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but then I overheard my mom on a call, casually mentioning the poll results and laughing. That was the first time it really hit me. This wasn't just some harmless fun. This was serious. About 2 weeks before the trip, I got a text from my older sister. It wasn't even a call, just a message saying, "Hey, so the votes are in and you're not coming this year. Sorry." That was it. No explanation, no room for discussion. Just sorry. When I finally got her on the phone, the reasoning she gave was almost laughable. Apparently, I didn't contribute enough to last year's trip. No kids, no partner, and I didn't help cook much, though that's because I was cleaning up after everyone else. They decided I wasn't a valuable enough addition to the group, and that was that. My parents backed it up, calling it democratic and acting like it was no big deal. I was furious. I've never asked for special treatment. I've always paid my share and done what I could. But apparently that didn't count for much in a system rigged to favor my siblings. When I tried to talk to my parents about it, they brushed me off, saying the decision was final, and I needed to respect the family vote. I was hurt, but more than that, I was angry. And that's when I noticed something interesting. While sulking at home, scrolling through Airbnb listings because apparently I now had a free week on my hands, I stumbled across a very familiar house. My parents' house. They had listed it on Airbnb to help cover the costs of the vacation. That wasn't surprising, they'd done it before, but what caught my attention was the calendar. They'd forgotten to block off the week of the trip. The house was still available to book. An idea hit me like a lightning bolt. I could sit around feeling sorry for myself, or I could do something about it. Using a fake name and a prepaid card, I booked the house for the exact dates they'd be gone. The Airbnb policies meant that last-minute cancellations would leave them scrambling to find another renter, but that wasn't my problem. I had every right to book a house that was listed as available. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, of course. Instead, I left a quick, cryptic message in the family group chat. "Have fun on the trip. I'll find a way to keep busy." As soon as the reservation was confirmed, I started making plans. I wasn't going to trash the place or do anything reckless. I'm not that kind of person. But if they were going to exclude me from the vacation, I figured I might as well enjoy my time off. It was their house, after all, and they'd made it clear they didn't need me around. It wasn't just about getting back at them, though. This was about showing them that I wouldn't just sit quietly and accept being pushed aside. If they didn't value me as part of the family, fine. I'd find my own way to have a good time. And that's how I ended up planning a very different kind of vacation, one that would change everything. Update 1. The morning of the Airbnb check-in felt surreal. I pulled up to my parents' house, keys in hand, technically a paying guest in the place where I grew up. The irony wasn't lost on me. The listing had instructions for a key box by the front door. I followed them to a T, stepping inside like I was entering someone else's world. Everything was just as I remembered: my mom's floral couch, the framed pictures of my siblings' weddings, the faint smell of lavender from the diffuser my mom insisted on using year-round. I set my bags down and did a quick walkthrough of the house. I took photos of every room, every corner, every surface. I knew how this family operated. If anything was out of place when they got back, it'd somehow be my fault. The documentation wasn't just a precaution, it was a necessity. Satisfied that I'd covered my bases, I settled in. My first call was to a couple of close friends. "Pack an overnight bag," I told them. "We're having a staycation." I made it clear this wasn't some wild house party. Respect the space, leave it clean, just enjoy the luxury my family seemed to think I didn't deserve. By the evening, my friends arrived with bags of snacks, drinks, and wide eyes at the situation I'd pulled off. The kitchen became our first order of business. I rarely cook at home. My apartment's tiny kitchen isn't exactly inspiring, but this was different. My parents' house had a fully stocked kitchen, complete with high-end appliances. We whipped up a feast: grilled steaks, roasted veggies, and a chocolate lava cake for dessert. It was the kind of meal that felt like a small rebellion. Later, while cleaning up, I wandered into the living room and noticed a stack of photo albums on the bottom shelf of the bookshelf. Curiosity got the better of me. As I flipped through the pages, I saw snapshots of family vacations from years past, my siblings and their kids building sandcastles, my mom reading on the porch, my dad grilling burgers. I was in some of the pictures, sure, but not as often as I expected. The albums seemed to focus on everyone else, highlighting their milestones, their memories. It was like I was a supporting character in my own family's story. Then came the receipts. Tucked inside one of the albums, I found a stack of folded papers. They were receipts for lavish gifts my parents had given my siblings, high-end electronics, vacations, even a down payment for a car. I couldn't help but notice the glaring absence of anything with my name on it. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. I set the receipts aside and joined my friends, cracking jokes about how I was living my best life in the house they tried to fund by kicking me out. The next morning, a neighbor stopped by. She was delivering a package that had been left at her house by mistake. When she saw me at the door, her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, I thought the family was on vacation," she said. I explained that I was renting the place for the week, which led to her laughing and shaking her head. "I always thought that voting thing was ridiculous," she muttered before handing me the box and walking off. That comment stuck with me. So, the neighbors knew about the voting system? How much else did they know? The staycation was going perfectly until one of my friends posted an Instagram story. It was an innocent clip of us laughing in the kitchen, but the background gave it away. My sister, who apparently checks social media like it's her job, saw the post within an hour. She called immediately. Her voice was sharp, accusing me of ruining the vacation vibe by being petty. I calmly pointed out that I'd done nothing wrong. The house was listed. I rented it. End of story. My parents weren't far behind. They called later that afternoon demanding to know why I was in their house. I reminded them it was an Airbnb rental, and as far as Airbnb was concerned, I was a guest. I wasn't breaking any rules. They tried to guilt me into leaving, but I stood my ground. The cherry on top came when my brother texted me, calling me childish and saying I was making things harder for everyone. I couldn't resist firing back. "At least I didn't vote you out of the family." He didn't reply after that. My friends were my rock through all of this. They kept reminding me that what I'd done wasn't just justified, it was brilliant. It wasn't about being petty, it was about showing my family that their actions had consequences. By the time the week was halfway over, I started noticing something odd. I'd always known my family's finances were a little strange, but being in the house gave me a front row seat to some of the inconsistencies. There were clues everywhere, old bills, notes scribbled on calendars, bank statements left in a drawer. It was like pieces of a puzzle were scattered around, just waiting to be put together. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about the vacation. There was something deeper going on here, and for the first time in years I felt like I was in a position to finally figure it out. Update 2. I checked out of my parents' house a day before they were scheduled to return. I made sure everything was spotless, floors vacuumed, counters wiped, and even the fridge cleaned out. I'd taken pictures of every room before I left, just in case. If they were going to accuse me of anything, I'd be ready. I even left a polite note on the counter, "Thanks for the stay. Hope the house treated you well." The silence started the moment they got home. The group chat, usually filled with updates about everyone's lives, was dead. No one messaged me, and I didn't reach out either. A couple of days later, I heard from a mutual friend that my parents were furious, but didn't know how to confront me without admitting they'd listed their house on Airbnb. It didn't take long for the fallout to spread. My siblings, apparently taking cues from my parents, started telling extended family that I'd done this to spite everyone. The funniest part? I wasn't the only one who had been excluded by this ridiculous voting system. My cousin reached out, unexpectedly, after hearing what had happened. She'd been left out of past family events in a similar way, only hers wasn't about vacations. It was weddings and holiday dinners. Apparently, this voting system wasn't new. It was just the first time it had been formalized. She told me that it had always felt like a subtle way to save money. Fewer people meant fewer expenses, and it seemed like my parents were using the system to manage costs without actually saying it. That conversation made me dig deeper. I still had access to a few financial records from when we'd shared costs for past vacations. What I found left me stunned. My parents had been charging me extra for years. While my siblings had received family discounts, I'd been paying full price, or more. My contributions had subsidized their stays, and I hadn't even realized it. I couldn't let it go. I wrote an email to my parents, carefully outlining everything I'd found. I explained how hurtful it was to realize I'd been treated differently, and I included screenshots of the discrepancies. I also mentioned the receipts I'd found for gifts they'd given my siblings, but not me. I wasn't looking for a fight, I just wanted to make it clear that I knew the truth. Their response was predictable. They didn't deny the financial inconsistencies, but framed the whole situation as a misunderstanding. According to them, the voting system was meant to encourage participation and wasn't about excluding me. They completely sidestepped the part about the extra charges. Instead, they painted me as overly sensitive and implied I was overreacting. The email sparked more drama than I expected. One of my extended family members got wind of the situation and reached out to me. She'd heard about the voting system and was appalled. She shared my email with a few others, and before I knew it, the story was spreading. It didn't help that the neighbors had started gossiping too. One of them, the same one who'd mentioned the voting system was ridiculous, told another neighbor about my Airbnb booking. Suddenly, my parents' actions were the talk of the neighborhood. For a touch of irony, I left a glowing review on their Airbnb listing. I praised the cleanliness, the comfortable beds, and the fully stocked kitchen, but I ended it with a cheeky note: perfect spot for a family getaway, if you're lucky enough to be included. Through mutual friends, I found out that my siblings weren't exactly having a great time either. They'd started arguing about who should cover more of the vacation costs. Apparently, without me paying extra, they were realizing just how expensive these trips really were. It was oddly satisfying to know that my absence was causing the kind of tension they'd avoided by voting me out. The most surprising development came from my youngest sister. She reached out privately and admitted that she'd voted against me, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't want to cause conflict with the rest of the family. She apologized, which was more than I'd expected from anyone, and said she regretted the whole situation. The fallout didn't stop there. The extended family started talking more openly about how my parents treated me differently. People were noticing things they hadn't before, patterns of favoritism that had gone unquestioned for years. Even my cousin, who'd felt excluded from other events, started speaking up. The more people shared their experiences, the clearer it became that this wasn't an isolated incident. By the end of it all, the family dynamic was irreversibly shifted. My parents were embarrassed but refused to take responsibility. My siblings were too busy arguing among themselves to address the bigger issues. And me? I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. For years, I'd bent over backward trying to be included, trying to prove my worth. But now I saw their behavior for what it was, unfair and self-serving. I wasn't going to let their treatment of me define my worth anymore. If they wanted to keep playing favorites, that was on them. I had my friends, my career, and a growing sense of independence. This wasn't just about the vacation anymore. It was about reclaiming my place in the story, not as the black sheep but as someone who wouldn't be pushed aside. Update 3. The week after I sent that email was eerily quiet. No one replied. The family group chat, which had been buzzing with passive-aggressive comments just days before, suddenly went silent. It felt intentional, like everyone was avoiding me. A few days later, my cousin, the one who'd reached out earlier, called to fill me in on what was happening behind the scenes. Apparently, my parents were embarrassed. They thought my actions, especially renting their house and sending that email, were childish. But instead of addressing it, they were pretending like it wasn't a big deal. The cousin told me my siblings were even more divided. My older brother had taken to posting cryptic messages on social media, things like, "Some people thrive on drama and family should mean forgiveness, not pettiness." It didn't take a detective to figure out who those posts were about. Then came the real bombshell from my cousin. The vacation voting system wasn't just about saving money, like we'd assumed. She had overheard my parents talking about it during a family gathering months ago. It turns out they thought it was a good way to avoid complicated dynamics. In other words, they wanted fewer people around who might stir the pot. Apparently, I fell into that category because I wasn't married, didn't have kids, and didn't fit into their idea of a perfect family unit. It wasn't just about money, it was about controlling the narrative. The more my cousin and I talked, the more we realized this wasn't new behavior. Growing up, there were always little signs of favoritism. My siblings had bigger allowances, better gifts, and more attention for milestones like graduations and birthdays. Meanwhile, I was always expected to just understand when things were different for me. It wasn't blatant enough to call out back then, but looking at it now, it was obvious. After almost a week of silence, my parents suddenly decided they wanted a family meeting. They framed it as a way to clear the air, but the terms were very telling. The meeting would be at their house, on their schedule, and there was no mention of an apology or acknowledgement of the issues I'd raised. It felt more like a setup than an actual attempt to fix anything. This time I stood my ground. I told them I wouldn't attend unless they were willing to address the favoritism and the financial discrepancies openly. I wasn't going to walk into a situation where I'd be ambushed or gaslit into thinking I was the problem. My refusal didn't sit well. My older siblings doubled down on their narrative that I was overreacting. But something interesting happened too. My youngest sister, the one who'd already apologized privately, started speaking up. She told me she understood my perspective and admitted that she'd been noticing the favoritism too. Having her support meant more than I realized, especially since it added more tension to the family dynamic. Then came the financial bombshell. While going through some old files, I found a folder with even more receipts. These weren't just for the expensive gifts my siblings had received. They were for the past vacations we'd all taken as a family. The math was clear. I'd been paying significantly more than my siblings for years. My share of the costs was inflated, while theirs was conveniently reduced. I took screenshots of everything and sent another email to the entire family. This one was less emotional and more factual. I laid out the numbers and asked for an explanation. The response was as vague as it was predictable. My parents didn't deny the numbers but claimed that everyone contributes in their own way and that the system had always been fair. They avoided addressing the specific discrepancies and instead tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding. One of my siblings even admitted they'd known about the uneven contributions but assumed I didn't mind because I never brought it up. Things escalated when my cousin decided to call her own family meeting. This one wasn't just for our immediate family, but for some of the extended relatives who'd been gossiping about the situation. She laid everything out, how the voting system worked, the financial inconsistencies, and the clear favoritism. It was like ripping the lid off a pressure cooker. The fallout was immediate. Some family members sided with me, saying they'd noticed the favoritism but had never felt it was their place to speak up. Others tried to justify my parents' behavior, claiming it was normal for parents to prioritize certain kids based on their needs. The divide was palpable, and it felt like this was the first time anyone had openly acknowledged the unspoken rules that had been running our family for years. By the end of the week, the family dynamic was in shambles. My parents were avoiding direct confrontation, my siblings were fighting amongst themselves, and extended family members were taking sides. For the first time, I didn't feel like the black sheep. I felt like the person who finally called out the broken system. This wasn't just about the vacation anymore. It was about years of inequality finally coming to light. And while the fallout was messy, I couldn't help but feel like it was long overdue. Update 4. The silence from my family stretched on, but the frustration of being ignored finally pushed me to take a different route. I shared my story anonymously on a community platform where people discussed family drama, unfair treatment, and complicated relationships. I laid out the facts, the voting system, the financial discrepancies, and the years of favoritism. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments poured in, most of them supportive, validating my decision to stand up for myself. Some people even shared similar experiences with their own families, which made me realize just how common these dynamics are. Word of my post spread faster than I expected. A few days later, my cousin told me that my parents were panicking. Somehow, the story had made its way back to them, though they didn't know it was me who shared it. Their main concern? Their reputation in the community. My parents have always been the type to care deeply about appearances, so the idea that people might see them as unfair or exclusionary was clearly getting to them. Around the same time, a family friend reached out to me. She told me she'd noticed the favoritism for years, but had never felt it was her place to say anything. She shared a few stories about times my parents had prioritized my siblings over me, things I hadn't even realized at the time. It was strange to hear someone outside the family validate what I'd been feeling for so long. Then my cousin dropped another bombshell. While talking with one of my older siblings, she learned about a secret savings fund my parents had set up years ago. The fund was meant to help pay for their grandchildren's college tuition, but it only included my siblings' children. Any future children I might have were excluded. When I asked my cousin how she knew for sure, she said my sibling had casually mentioned it, assuming I already knew. When my parents eventually caught wind that I knew about the fund, they tried to spin it as a gift for the grandkids and claimed it wasn't meant to exclude me. But the math didn't lie. The fund was structured to benefit only my siblings' kids, and there was no mention of it ever being adjusted if I had children of my own. That wasn't just favoritism, it was financial discrimination. At this point, my siblings started turning on each other. One of my older brothers accused another of stirring the pot by letting me find out about the fund. The argument escalated, with one sibling claiming that if someone had just defended me earlier, none of this would have happened. It was a mess, and I wasn't even involved in those conversations. Meanwhile, my parents doubled down on their attempts to gaslight me. They claimed the fund wasn't personal and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I wasn't buying it. I decided to consult a lawyer. I wanted to make sure that if the fund technically included all grandchildren, my future kids couldn't be excluded just because of my parents' preferences. After reviewing the details, the lawyer confirmed there was a case to be made if they tried to exclude me unfairly. With that knowledge, I sent my parents a formal letter. It wasn't a threat, it was a clear explanation of my expectations. If they wanted to keep the fund exclusive, they'd need to justify it legally. I made it clear I wasn't going to back down. This letter caused even more division in the family. My youngest sibling, who had already apologized to me privately, confronted my parents openly for the first time. She accused them of creating this mess by playing favorites for years and demanded they address the situation honestly. Her support meant a lot, but it also deepened the fractures in the family. The once tight-knit group was now splintering, and my parents were clearly struggling to keep control. The gossip in the neighborhood didn't help. One neighbor casually mentioned to me that my parents had been bragging about the voting system before the vacation. They'd called it a great way to manage vacation dynamics, but now that people knew how it had turned out, the tone had shifted. To add to their problems, I decided to update my Airbnb review of their house. This time I left a more formal review. I didn't name them, but I hinted at the issues with the hosts, mentioning a lack of fairness in dealings. Within days, I noticed their listing had fewer bookings, and my cousin confirmed that some potential renters had canceled. Sensing they were losing control, my parents finally reached out, asking to meet and talk things through. But I wasn't about to walk into another ambush. I insisted on meeting at a neutral location with a witness present. They reluctantly agreed. At the meeting, they offered to repay some of the money I'd unknowingly subsidized, but it came with strings attached. I'd need to stop sharing anything else publicly and drop the issue of the fund. I declined. I told them reconciliation would only work if it came with accountability, not conditions. After the meeting, I decided to shift my focus. Instead of waiting for my family to change, I started planning my own vacations with supportive friends and extended family members who had reached out to show solidarity. I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I could create my own traditions with people who actually valued me. Update 5. After our tense meeting, I thought my parents might take some time to reflect on everything. Instead, they doubled down. A few days later, they sent a family-wide email framing themselves as victims of my vindictiveness. They painted a picture of themselves as loving parents who had only ever tried to create harmony and blamed me for tearing the family apart. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, but this time it didn't work. Their email backfired almost immediately. Several extended family members, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, started speaking up. Some sent private messages to me, expressing their support and acknowledging that they'd seen the favoritism for years but had been too uncomfortable to say anything. One uncle replied directly to the email thread, calling out my parents for their behavior and expressing disappointment in how they'd handled the entire situation. He wasn't the only one. Meanwhile, the voting system, the catalyst for this whole mess, finally came under scrutiny. Another cousin revealed that the voting idea had originally been suggested years ago as a joke during a holiday dinner. It was never meant to be taken seriously, but my parents had latched onto it as a convenient way to exclude me without confrontation. The absurdity of it all left my siblings arguing amongst themselves. One of them accused another of suggesting the idea in earnest, and the finger pointing quickly spiraled out of control. While my parents tried to maintain their narrative, they were blindsided by an unexpected intervention. A well-respected family friend, someone they admired and often sought advice from, privately confronted them. She urged them to address the situation, honestly, before they lost me completely. My cousin told me about the confrontation later, and while I didn't expect much to change, it was validating to know someone else had stepped in on my behalf. Not long after, I received an unsigned letter in the mail. It was an apology for the vacation vote, vaguely acknowledging that it had been unfair and poorly handled. While it wasn't explicitly stated, the tone of the letter hinted that it might have come from my dad. He didn't follow up or admit to writing it though, so I didn't dwell on it. At the same time, I decided to take one final legal step. After consulting my lawyer, I filed a formal complaint to ensure the family trust fund followed the legal guidelines that specified all grandchildren. This move sent ripples through my siblings, who suddenly realized that their own children's benefits might be at risk if my parents didn't comply. It created even more tension, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The pressure seemed to be getting to my parents. They quietly took down their Airbnb listing, likely realizing that their actions had alienated not just me but also some of their neighbors and community. My cousin later confirmed that the neighbors were gossiping about the whole situation, and my parents were clearly uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Amid all the chaos, life outside my family drama took a surprising turn. I received a major promotion at work, one that allowed me to focus on my personal goals and gain more financial independence. It was a silver lining in an otherwise tumultuous time, and it gave me the clarity to prioritize what really mattered. The fallout from my parents' actions continued to ripple outward. Extended family members began questioning their behavior more openly, and their exclusionary actions became a common topic of gossip. My parents' carefully crafted reputation as the perfect family started to crack, and I could tell they were feeling the heat. One of the most unexpected moments came when my youngest sibling, the only one who had apologized, reached out with an olive branch. She invited me to a neutral family dinner to start rebuilding our relationship. She admitted that she had been complicit in some of the favoritism but wanted to make things right moving forward. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Eventually, my parents issued a half-hearted apology. It was more about appeasing the extended family than genuinely addressing the hurt they'd caused. They stopped short of admitting the full scope of their wrongdoing, instead framing it as a misunderstanding. I let them know that any future reconciliation would need to come with genuine accountability and a commitment to treating me as an equal, not as an afterthought. With that chapter closed, I decided to focus on creating new traditions. I organized a trip with supportive friends and cousins, people who had stood by me through the drama. It was refreshing to spend time with people who valued and respected me for who I am, not for what I could contribute financially or socially. Looking back, the whole ordeal taught me more than I ever wanted to know about family dynamics and favoritism. But it also showed me the importance of standing up for myself and setting boundaries. I stopped chasing validation from people who don't see my worth. Instead, I'm building a life and a chosen family that brings me joy and fulfillment. For the first time in a long time, I feel free.